First of all, let me say, I'm glad I'm not running against Mark. After listening to him talk, I'm ready to vote for him. There's only two things I disagree with that you said, Mark. First of all, I think 12 years is too long on the term limit. Get them out sooner. Especially if they go from Congress to Senate. That's 24 years. That's too long to be in Washington. Just to come, when the Founding Fathers first, when they created the 2-year term for the members of the House, it was because they thought they'd be out of there in 2 years. We're supposed to be turnover. Let people go. You don't go, it's like jury duty. You're like going to the Army. You don't stay there for your life. We don't want people in Washington who are career politicians. They should have a regular career, and they do it briefly. But the other thing I disagree with you on, and I'm going to get into my presentation, the debt, our kids are not going to pay these debts. Because they're not going to be here. They're going to leave. People used to go to Canada to escape the draft. They're going to be going to Canada to escape the taxes. The debt that we're issuing right now, it's not 30-year bonds. Right? The debt comes due in 6 months, in a year, or 2 years. We're going to deal with it. We're going to deal with it in this generation. This thing is a ticking time bomb, and it's blowing up now. So it's not just our kids. Right? There's a whole world out there. They can leave. They can go work. We're stuck here. And we got to solve these problems right now. If people who think that, let my children deal with it. Right? This country was built on immigrants. People came here because it was miserable where they were, because the governments were too big. And if we make it miserable here because we load this generation up with debt, they're not going to stay. There's a big world out there, and I know about it because I'm investing all over the world. There's plenty of places where governments are a lot less intrusive, where taxes are lower, where spending is lower, where regulations are fewer. Capital is going there now. That's the first thing. We're chasing the capital out of the country. The labor's next. Anyway, but I appreciate what you have to say. Anyway, so I'm running for United States Senate. I'm also, a business person. I own a brokerage firm, investment firm. I deal with individuals like yourselves. I do some institutional business, but it's mostly individual accounts. I do some asset management. I have a mutual fund. I'm launching another one in April. I do investment banking. And in my career, the most important thing and what helps me decide how to invest my money, I take a very macro view of the world. And I concentrate on government policy and how government policy influences economies, how it influences their growth rates, their inflation rates, their employment. And over that time, I have been extremely concerned and worried about what Washington has been doing. The policies that have been pursued, both from the Federal Reserve, which not that many people talk about, but also Congress, have been very destructive to our economy. They've undermined our currency. They've distorted free markets. They've led to reckless speculation on Wall Street and excess consumption on Main Street. They've created a climate that's very hostile to businesses. And so as a result, I invest most of my money elsewhere. And at this point, though, the problems are now so extreme that as an American, I can't just sit around and try to figure out how to protect, 15,000 of my clients from the foolish policies coming out of Washington and figuring out how to, profit from it. I want to stop it. Enough is enough. I want to actually go to Washington and stop the madness. Stop the government from destroying our own economy, which is exactly what they're doing. The people who told us that everything was great, right? The economy was great, right up until the moment when it fell off the edge of a cliff. These are the same people that are telling us that the stimulus is working, that the economy is recovering. We're not recovering from anything. We're actually getting sicker. All we're doing now is spending more borrowed money. But that's why we're in so much trouble. And the government points to the GDP numbers that are going up. Well, so what that they're going up? We're spending money. The debt is growing faster than the GDP, so the money we're spending, we're borrowing. Where are we borrowing it from? China? From Japan? From Saudi Arabia? How is this helping our country to go deep in debt? And what are we getting for all this borrowed money? Are we building new factories? Are we going to be able to produce more products? No. We're getting more government. Right? We're getting more government health care, more government programs. How is growing the government going to possibly help our economy? Right? That's like if you're trying to run a marathon and now someone wants to put a 40-pound back on your back. How are you going to run faster with all that weight? The size of government. The government is now spending, this new budget is $3.7 trillion. I'm sure it'll be $4 trillion by the time they finish the year out. $4 trillion in 1 year. That's more than twice. Even $3.7 trillion is double what the government spent in the year 2000. Double. Now, I remember the year 2000. It wasn't that long ago. And I remember thinking that government was too big back then. And now it's doubled in size. And we have to ask ourselves, how can we afford this? Right? Because the government has to take the money from us. It doesn't have, it doesn't get it from the man on the moon. It has to get it from Americans. Well, how can we afford it? The stock market is no higher than it was 10 years ago. A lot of stocks are lower. A lot of Americans earn less than they did 10 years ago. A lot of Americans don't earn anything because they're unemployed. How can we afford to pay the government twice as much? And what happens when the government spends $4 trillion? What is the downside of that? What else could we have done with that money? The deficit is about $1.5 trillion. So for every dollar they're collecting in taxes, they're actually spending $1.60. But what are the consequences of the government borrowing $1.5 trillion? Well, there's only a finite amount of credit that comes from savings. If the government goes and borrows that money, a business can't borrow that money. And if the business can't borrow, well, how's it going to make the investments that it needs to grow? Where's capital going to come from? Where are jobs going to come from? They're not. That's why jobs are disappearing. It's because the government is so big that it's suffocating, it's sucking the lifeblood out of the economy. And unfortunately, the people in Washington, they think that, well, we can create growth by growing government. But you can't. They don't make the connection between what they're doing and the problems of the economy. It's like they've lit this big fire, and it's burning. And all they can think of is, well, let's put it out, let's throw some gasoline on it. And the more gasoline they throw on the fire, the bigger it gets. And they don't make the connection between the gasoline and the fire, so they just throw more on. And they're clueless. I want to go to Washington and get them to understand, get to grab that pail of gasoline out of their hands and prevent them from feeding this fire. Because at the rate that the economy is growing now, we're going to create a much bigger crisis. I made a bit of a name for myself on national television. I see one of my books there, Crash Proof 2.0.
Very good.
The original version of that book came out in February of 2007. But I started writing it in 2005. So that's what I really was, putting this stuff to ink. But even starting in 2005, I became a regular on financial television. I was going on CNBC, CNN, Fox, Bloomberg. Every week I was on television. Every week arguing with all the talking heads, all the pundits, all the economists, all the Wall Street shills, all the people from government, everybody I debated them. And sometimes it would be me, and it'd be 4 or 5 other people. And often when they would invite me on to be like a bull-bear debate, I would end up debating the host too, because the host was against me. And, CNBC started calling me Dr. Doom. But people would laugh at me because the things. What did I say? I said that the housing bubble was going to collapse. I said real estate prices would fall 30 to 50% nationwide. That Freddie and Fannie would go bankrupt. That Wall Street banks would fail. That commercial banks would fail. I said that General Motors would go bankrupt. I mean, people thought these were crazy things that they couldn't happen, and of course, they all happened. So I built a pretty good reputation on understanding that. I understood the last bubble. The NASDAQ bubble. When I started my firm, I worked initially for Lehman Brothers. And I worked there for a little while, and I didn't like it. I just didn't think that the individual investor got a fair shake. So I wanted to start my own firm, and where the individual came first, not the institution. And so I started working out of my one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles. But relatively early in my career, I became very concerned about the NASDAQ bubble. I watched people do all kinds of stupid things with their money. People were investing in these dot-com stocks, and I knew that they were completely worthless. And rather than doing the easy thing, which most of my friends were doing, brokers made a lot of money in the late 1990s because all you had to do was tell people about an internet stock and they wanted it. So it was easy to sell internet stocks. What I did is I spent 1998 through 2000 talking people out of those stocks, getting them to sell those stocks, and that was a hard thing to do because no one wanted to hear that. No one wanted. I was the bearer of bad news that they can't get rich on these .com stocks. But ultimately, I built up a big clientele because when the NASDAQ bubble burst in 2000, I got a lot of credibility with a number of people, and that's when I really started taking off. Up until 2000, I had no employees. It was just me. I had a secretary in 2000. Now I have over 100 employees. I have 6 offices. I probably had in 2000 maybe a couple of hundred customers. Now I have over 15,000. Right? It started by getting the NASDAQ right, getting that bubble right. And I understand